There is a truth silently shaping your life, your future, your children's future, and yet most people move through their days completely unaware they're standing inside the most ambitious financial experiment ever attempted by any civilization in human history. Global debt, sovereign, corporate, household, personal, has not merely grown. It has mutated, expanding beyond the limits of logic, mathematics, and even political reality. Governments borrow trillions without blinking. Central banks conjure money with keystrokes. Ordinary families take on 30-year mortgages with the casualness of buying a weekly grocery cart. And through all of this, we still speak about debt as if it were stable, safe, normal, a quiet companion of modern life. But that assumption is a fabrication. Debt has never been neutral. It has never been harmless. It has always been a tool of power, a mechanism of control, and a fuse waiting for the spark that will set the entire structure aflame. The uncomfortable truth is this: the global debt bomb is going to explode. The only questions left are when and who will be sacrificed to contain the damage. To understand where we're heading, we need to go back, far back, to the very beginning of debt itself. Debt is older than money, older than markets, older than nations. When archaeologists unearthed the first clay tablets in Mesopotamia, they didn't find letters or myths or poetry. They found ledgers. Someone owed someone else grain, someone owed cattle, someone owed labor. Debt in ancient societies wasn't merely an economic transaction, it was spiritual. It lived under the supervision of priests, kings, and gods. It was enforced by divine authority and political force. And every few decades, something remarkable happened, something almost impossible to imagine today. A debt jubilee, a complete erasure of obligations. A voluntary reset of the entire financial ledger. Why? Because even ancient kings understood something modern leaders pretend not to know. You cannot build a society where the majority of people are trapped under unpayable obligations. Eventually, they revolt, or the system collapses, or both. Debt was power, but too much debt was poison. Fast forward to Renaissance Europe. Debt had evolved, gold replaced grain, interest replaced obligation. Banking families like the Medici crafted an early form of the global financial system, funding popes, monarchs, and armies. But the danger never changed. Spain, overflowing with silver from the New World, declared bankruptcy 4 separate times in the 1500s. Empires discovered what ancient peasants already knew. Debt can devour even the mighty. It shaped wars, toppled dynasties, shifted continents. But the real turning point, the true birth of our modern debt nightmare, began in the 20th century. After World War I, nations were drowning in obligations so colossal that repayment became impossible. Germany, crushed under reparations, spiraled into hyper-inflation so severe that workers demanded wages twice a day before prices surged again by evening. Debt didn't just break an economy, it destabilized a civilization. Then came 1944, Bretton Woods, the blueprint of the modern global financial structure. The United States, holding 2/3 of the world's gold, designed a system with itself at the center. The dollar was the anchor, gold was the guarantee. The world's currencies were tethered to that promise. It was sold as stability, but in truth, it created dependence, an entire global economy resting on one country's discipline. A discipline that would not last. By the late 1960s, between the Vietnam War and vast domestic spending, America printed more dollars than it had gold to back. Foreign governments noticed. They demanded gold. The vaults began to empty. And in 1971, without warning, President Richard Nixon severed the link. The dollar was no longer convertible to gold. The global system was no longer anchored to anything real. Debt became infinite. Money became elastic. Promise replaced substance. It was the quiet revolution that reshaped the world more than any war or treaty in the last century. With gold gone, central banks discovered their ultimate weapon, the power to engineer reality through interest rates. Lower rates encouraged borrowing, borrowing fueled growth, growth justified more borrowing, a self-reinforcing loop. The 1980s brought massive government borrowing. Developing nations borrowed heavily from Western banks and were crushed in the Latin American debt crisis. The 1990s saw new bubbles emerging markets, tech stocks, corporate leverage. Then came 2008, the moment the world glimpsed the true architecture of modern debt. Housing wasn't the problem. Mortgages weren't the problem. The problem was leverage so extreme that a single failing block caused the entire pyramid to tremble. Debt packaged into securities. Securities insured with derivatives. Derivatives multiplied with 20, 30, even 40. One leverage. It wasn't a financial system. It was a powder keg. When it exploded, banks collapsed, pensions evaporated, and millions lost homes, yet the same institutions that engineered the disaster were rescued with trillions in taxpayer-funded bailouts. The message was unmistakable. In this system, debt is privatized on the upside and socialized on the downside. Risk belongs to you, reward belongs to them. Since then, global debt has metastasized. By 2023, it hit $300 trillion, nearly 4 times the size of the global economy. Japan's public debt passed 260% of GDP. The U.S. national debt exploded past $34 trillion. China hid trillions in local government financing vehicles. Corporations borrowed to buy back their own stock. Consumers borrowed to survive rising costs. Governments borrowed to avoid political consequences. Debt had become the foundation upon which the entire global economy rests, a foundation made of quicksand. But here is the deeper danger. Debt creates illusions. It makes societies believe they are wealthier than they are. It masks decline with temporary growth. It shifts costs into the future onto people who didn't consent. Every dollar borrowed today is a silent claim on tomorrow's labor, tomorrow's taxes, tomorrow's options, and now the consequences are becoming visible again. Interest rates have risen. The cost of servicing debt has spiked. Governments face budget crises. Families face higher mortgage payments. Corporations face refinancing cliffs. Debt, once weightless, has awakened. And like gravity, it always pulls everything back to earth. So what comes next? History gives us only 3 outcomes when debt grows beyond what a society can bear. Inflation destroying savings to shrink obligations. Restructuring admitting the debt cannot be paid and renegotiating terms. Default, the full collapse of trust. Inflation is already underway. Governments prefer it because it hides the cost from voters. It punishes savers quietly and rewards borrowers silently. Restructuring will follow in weaker nations. The first cracks always appear at the edges. Default is the final stage, rare in stable nations, but not impossible. But here's the truth the powerful will never admit. Debt crises do not fall equally. The wealthy get rescued. The political class gets protected. Corporations get bailed out. The average citizen gets sacrificed. Debt is not economics. It is hierarchy. It determines who holds the chains and who wears them. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with a choice. You can continue walking through life believing debt is harmless, believing inflation is a normal inconvenience, believing governments and banks have everything under control. Or you can see the system for what it is and recognize that every cycle ends the same way. Debt, denial, crisis, reset, repeat. The only protection is knowledge, preparation, and a refusal to sleepwalk into the same traps that history has set for every empire before ours. Because global debt is not a number, it is a shadow, a pressure, a countdown, and unless societies learn, the shadow always wins. If this changed the way you see the world, tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest. And if you want more investigations into the systems shaping your life, subscribe to the Fiscal Archivist. History leaves clues. I'll help you read them.